Welcome Life Science learners to another lesson. Trust that you're excited about the lesson. What is it that we're looking at today? Let's see. We're looking at the structure of the exam paper and exam writing skills. Guys, we often tend to focus on preparing for an exam by studying content. Well, that's very important. Have you thought about how to prepare to answer specific questions? It's important that when you prepare that you go through exam papers, that you work through these after revising your content. However, being able to interpret a question, being able to plan how you write your exam is crucial. So let's get into our lesson today and focus on understanding what is the structure of your paper and try to attempt to analyze how we attempt questions in your exam paper. Let's get straight into the overview of the lesson and unpack the details. As I mentioned, it's crucial that we understand the structure of any exam paper. Guys, it's often when we get into an exam that you know that there's going to be a section A question, there's going to be section B and section C. It's important that you know how long your exam is and what are the types of questions that exist in that exam. And that allows you to mentally prepare and anticipate questions. What do I mean by anticipate? It means essentially you are not caught off guard. So you don't want to be sitting in an exam, opening that exam paper and looking, I've never seen a question like this before. Or be able to not understand what is the structure. So the exam paper has a specific flow, it has a specific structure. And that structure has obviously been determined by the examiner. It's important that you look at some exemplar papers, even some past exam papers, to get a sense of what is the structure of your exam, not just in life sciences, but I suppose in every subject. And that's a clever way and a smart way of preparing for your exams. The next thing, it's important that you recognize the content. Guys, you would have heard that your teachers have meant ATPs, and that's your annual teaching plans or your term plans. And those often give you a breakdown of the exact topics and the breakdown within a topic of what needs to be studied. Refer to that. It's important that you know what the content is in each paper. I'd be worried if you went into a paper not knowing what the content was, especially when you have a subject where there are two papers. In life sciences, we've got two papers. It's important that you recognize that the content for paper 1 is different for paper 2 and recognize that you need to prepare accordingly. So it's important that you have access to the content material, not just the notes, but knowing what is the content in each paper. The next part is understanding the sections of the paper and knowing that there are different sections, and these sections are set according to different levels of assessment. And that's what we will unpack. And finally, it's important that we recognize how to manage your time. And often if you think about an exam paper that is 250 or 150 marks for 2.5 hours, you've got to be able to break that down into what is the ratio of time or minutes per mark. And that gives you a sense of how much of time you spend on a 20-mark question, or for that matter, on a 40-mark question. So let's get and try and unpack all of that and the skills that we need in answering an exam paper. So guys, the structure of an exam paper in life sciences, there are two examinations that are written. As I mentioned, there is a paper 1 and a paper 2. It's important that you go and you download these papers. Access these papers from the specific websites that you can access them from. And that'll give you exposure to previous exam papers. Download these, print them out, keep them in a file. We know that each paper contains 150 marks, and this is written over 150 minutes. So guys, you can do the math. You can clearly see that there's a ratio here between marks and the time that is being allocated for that. The assessments in grade 12s are often catered for different abilities. What does that mean? So the examiner, when they set the paper, often sets it to a specific ability, to a specific standard. But that is based on the years of research that they've done, based on the structure of the exam, and the objective of being able to set an assessment. So we know that assessments in grade 12 cater for different abilities of learners by covering a range of cognitive levels and degrees of difficulty. Guys, it's important that any assessment is set so that we cater for every type of learner with different abilities. Those that are really the high flyers to those that generally struggle in a subject. The paper is balanced so that it gives an opportunity for learners that experience difficulties with some of the challenging questions to be able to answer some of the or parts of it. And it also allows for the top end learners to be able to be stretched, challenged, so that it differentiates your distinguishing characteristics like your A levels and those guys that are getting distinctions. So the exam is set carefully to consider the different cognitive levels. It also covers a different level of difficulty, where you've got questions in your first part of your exam being the easier ones, and as you get into the structure of the paper, you find that the level of difficulty becomes much more challenging. These, together with subject content, specific aims, and a range of skills, are used in planning and developing the assessment task. When we look at your exam paper, we use a weighting to apply the assessment tasks that are set for grade 12. There are 4 different categories of questions. When we talk about categories, these test different cognitive levels, and these are essentially levels of questions that are designed to test the understanding. So we've got the knowledge-based questions, and these generally are questions based on being able to define a term, being able to match a term to a description. Those are your knowledge-based questions that comes from learning the content. And if you look at it, this makes up 40% of the paper. And that's a large percentage of the paper that in terms of allows most learners to be able to attempt and score marks successfully. The next part of the paper, which we refer to as a cognitive level, requires comprehension. Guys, reading and comprehending a specific set of data or information is important. And so if you look at that, that's 25% of your paper. So guys, these are generally your more accessible, easier questions that allow you to score the marks. The next part of the paper is the application part, and that it makes up 20%. What does that mean? This means taking your understanding and applying that to different contexts or different case studies. So you will find that the application of knowledge, again, is a higher cognitive development area that requires more application, more understanding, and that is 20% of your exam paper. And finally, we have questions that require you to analyze, synthesize, and evaluate data. And this again often is in your latter part of the paper, which requires you to be able to read graphs, be able to analyze information placed in flow charts or diagrams, and then synthesize information and prepare that in the form of either longer answers or sometimes in the form of an essay. So you find that this is the differentiating factor that often requires a higher cognitive level of understanding. So in many ways, the paper is well balanced, again, giving many individuals the chance to be able to score well, provided that you've prepared for these papers. And as I mentioned, the degree of difficulty is set based on the CAPS amended document, and this is what we look at. So 30% is easy for the average learner to answer. So 30% of your paper contains questions that the average learner will answer. And what do we mean by the average learner? This doesn't point to an average individual. It refers to a set of skills that we look at and we say, well, an average learner that is generally well clued with the subject can answer these questions. 40% of the paper is moderately challenging with an average learner for the average learner to answer. So it means that you've got 40% that challenges the average learner. Remember that the object of an assessment or examination is to be able to ascertain how much the learners have understood, and hence it has to challenge them. So moderately challenging. We find that 25% is difficult for the average learner to answer. Again, this would be questions that require synthesis, evaluation, and presenting information in the form of an essay or longer response questions. So that is again now differentiating your higher above average learners. And then we have 5%, guys. So if you struggle with concepts, know that these are often 5% of the question paper is really going to be challenging. So it means that really you've got to really work hard and you've got to prepare for that level of difficulty in the exam paper. So guys, it's important that we understand that when we prepare. The next part of the discussion is that the framework for thinking about questions or items of difficulty looks at the following 4 general categories of difficulty. So when the examiner is setting this exam, they look for these levels of difficulty. First, there must be content knowledge, so a specific topic or concept, and the difficulty level is considered. We also know that there are questions based on stimulating interest, such as questions or source-based materials that provide a stimulus to a specific concept or content. There are tasks that are processes that have different difficulty. For example, protein synthesis or the process of meiosis and the stages. So there's a process that requires a level of understanding. And then expected responses. So these would be based on how an assessment is designed, and we look at the memo that is provided and we align that to make sure that the memo is inclusive of all possible answers that may be given for a specific response. And guys, it's important that as we wrap this section up, you understand that the structure of the exam consists currently of 2 question papers. They're 2 hours each, 150 marks. Each question paper consists of type A questions, and type B. These questions involved in type A are short answer questions, such as your multiple choice, your terminology, columns and statements, and matching, and often your true and false questions. And that makes up 50 marks. The balance of the paper, which is section B, these contain a variety of types of questions. In this, there are 2 questions, question 2 and 3, and each is divided into a number of sub-questions, and each further may be divided into sub-questions. And this all involves the analysis, the application, detailed understanding. Again, this makes up the other 100 marks of that paper. So guys, the structure of the paper has been changed, as you would notice for this, and hence it's important that you recognize this and look at exemplars in preparation for these exams. That's an overview of the structure of the paper, guys. Let's have a little break, and when we get back, we will look at how to prepare to answer some of these questions. See you in a bit. Welcome back, Life Science learners. Let's continue with our lesson. Remember that we're focusing on exam writing skills. We've just looked at the structure of the exam paper. In this segment, we're going to focus on how to manage sections of the paper and looking at the interpretation of topics that are linked together in paper 1 as well as in paper 2. So guys, it's important that, as I mentioned earlier on, that you understand the distribution of the topics for paper 1 and paper 2. There has been some change, and this is an amended CAPS document. Recognize that this is relevant to you as you prepare for your exam. What does that mean? It means that you need to understand how the structure of paper 1 has changed. Let's look at the topics in paper 1, and let's try and understand what is the weighting that each topic has. I think this is important for you to be able to recognize so that you prepare and understand the content, volume, and effort that's required per topic. Let's look at that. So in term 1, guys, you would have done reproduction in vertebrates. This is a relatively small section. It makes up 5% of your paper, and approximately around 8 marks are set from this section. What does this mean? It means that if this topic is learnt really well, and if you've kind of focused on the key concepts, you could easily score those 8 marks. And that is the best part about learning a section that has a little detail in it. It's easy to learn it, it's easy to be able to score these 8 marks because you've learned all of that. The next topic in paper 2 is human reproduction. Paper 1 is human reproduction. And this makes up 27% of the exam. What does this translate to? 41 marks. Now we're in business. It's a significant amount of marks for paper 1. What does this mean, guys? It means that you've got to really know your content, from the parts of the male and female reproductive systems to the hormones involved to the menstrual cycle. Those are fundamental to being able to access maximum of 41 marks. So it means that a lot of effort is required in preparing on that topic. The next bit is the the responding to the environment, and this would be humans responding to the environment, and this includes the nervous system. We talk about the structure of the eye, the ear, the brain, and neurons and how they work in terms of the reflex arc. Again, guys, look at that, 36%. A significant proportion of paper 1 comes from this topic. Again, very important that you learn this section really well. 54 marks of paper 1 is in this area. Again, a good fat hint for us to be able to prepare. Responding to the environment in terms of plants, and this would include your hormones and plant hormones, and that's 9% of paper 1, which is made up of 13 marks. Again, guys, a small section that you learn really well, and you're now able to access those 13 marks because you focused well on them. Guys, and finally, the endocrine and homeostasis in humans in terms of systems that maintain balance and equilibrium, and that's important, and that's 23% of paper 1, which is made up of 34 marks. So guys, if you were to look at this and if you were to prepare for the exam, you can now plan the time that you invest in this, and you look at it, you can see that a large percentage of the exam is focused in these areas here, which would be human reproduction, the response to the environment. What does this mean? It means that as you start preparing for your exams, that you make these sections a focus, that you learn these sections in detail, and you understand the context of all those little concepts that are integral to the entire topic. Refer to the ATPs. Try and unpack what are the different concepts that need to be learned. And as you unpack that, you chip away at this huge 54 mark of that exam paper. Again, that's the easiest way to prepare, is try and break it down into bite-sized pieces and then prepare on that. So the acronym, what's the best way to eat, not an acronym, but what's the best way to eat an elephant? It's by eating it bit by bit. And essentially, if you're able to do this and break that down into small bits, you'll be able to get through this successfully. Right, let's look at the distribution of the topics for paper 2. And paper 2 consists of DNA, which is the code of life, which includes the processes, the structure of DNA, mRNA, and the concepts around protein synthesis, as well as DNA replication. And that makes up 18% of this paper. A good 27 marks that can easily be accessed, guys. Knowing the structure of DNA, RNA, comparing them with each other, the structural differences, will give you around 27 marks to be able to access. The next bit is meiosis, and what we would see now is that meiosis is exclusively in paper 2, and now it's the content that is being tested for about 14%, so much more than previously where it was distributed into 2 papers, and that makes up a good 21 marks. So it's good to focus on meiosis and understand the process, the stages, the reasons for variation, as well as the significance of what happens when meiosis goes wrong in terms of abnormalities. Genetics and inheritance, guys. Again, 32% of the paper. Probably the second largest component of paper 2 is genetics and inheritance. A good 48 marks that can be scored. So this stems from understanding the concepts around Mendelian genetics, the process of how to carry out a genetic diagram, solving some genetic problems based on terminology is very important. And then looking at genetic engineering, the concepts of cloning, somatic cell nuclear transfer, as well as other techniques used in recombinant DNA technology. And those make up, again, a good, healthy 48 marks that can easily be accessed. And finally, we have evolution, probably the largest chunk of paper 2, and that is 36%, making up 54 of the marks. And that's important for you to prepare well. Evolution is often seen as a topic that we often shy away from. Again, guys, it's the focus of paper 2, with a large amount of marks coming from this topic. Again, refer to the ATPs, try and unpack what are the specific content that needs to be learned, and prepare that. So, how do we manage your time? It's important that when we do look at time, we understand that the examiner will set a paper to keep you busy for the most of the duration of the paper. It's important that you give that the due respect that it needs. What do I mean by that? I mean that you're conscious about time as you write your exam. So you need to manage your time properly. Don't waste time on questions you're unsure of. Read through them and make sure that you keep some time to be able to get back to them. move on and come back to them if time allows. You have 150 minutes, which is approximately 2.5 hours, to answer each of the 150 mark questions in paper 1 and paper 2. Spend the following time on each of the following sections. As I mentioned, the paper has section A, which is 50 marks. And generally these are questions that are the easier questions that require short answers that can be attempted in a suggested 40 minutes. So if your exam starts at 9 o'clock, guys, you should know that when you look up that clock at about 20 to 10, that you now have completed around most of section A. And that's a good way to be able to prepare yourself every time you glance at the clock to know that that is the pace at which you should be answering. Question 2 needs to be 50 marks, and you need to spend around 45 minutes on this, guys, both question 2 and question 3. These are your longer questions, but again, having completed this gives you some time to be able to go back and attempt those questions that you haven't answered fully, or questions that you've kind of had to skip and move on to. So the last 15 minutes are important to use that remaining time to check your answers and to attempt them if you haven't attempted those questions that you might have left out. So guys, it's important that you manage your time and you're aware of time as you write. Do not overwrite for a specific answer. And what do I mean by that? I mean that often learners tend to write more than is required, and that often happens when you're unsure about an answer. So let's look at the concepts and how they are linked. Guys, as we overview paper 1, it's important that you understand that the concepts are linked in every exam paper. So, when we talk about the content for paper 1, human reproduction is linked to the endocrine system. There are hormones involved. So when you study a section, think about the connectedness between one topic and the next. When we talk about the concept of responding to the environment, where we're looking at how the human brain coordinates responses to light and the eye and the ear function, it's important that we recognize that there's an endocrine system that also functions. We can look at that in paper 2 as well. As I mentioned, there's an interconnectedness between the various topics, which you need to start seeing. And that's important, and that completes and circles your understanding of the topic. Please don't learn content in little pockets. It's important that once you've done sections that you now look at the interconnectedness. Let's look at that in paper 2 as well. So we know that DNA is the first topic, but DNA is fundamental to many parts of paper 2. And if you look at DNA and the fact that we look at mutations and we understand that mutations are what drives evolution, and that is what the examiner wants you to be able to carry through. So we refer to this being a thread, a theme. Guys, we know that genetics and how characteristics are passed down are fundamental to concepts that we relate to evolution. We also know that there's mutations that happen in meiosis. The process of crossing over and the exchange of genetic information during crossover creates variation, and that is what drives evolution. So what am I getting to? I'm getting to the concept that we need to understand that all of this is interconnected. And so guys, when you're preparing and writing your exams, know that the examiner often sets questions that link together concepts from different aspects. So as we wrap this up, we've looked at how you can look at sections of the paper, we've managed your time, and what we've just mentioned was the fact that concepts can be linked together. Welcome back, Life Science learners. Let's continue with our lesson. In our lesson, we've been looking at how to answer an exam paper. We've looked at the structure of the exam paper, and now we're going to look at how to attempt questions in section A. It's important that when you look at section A, you recognize that reading the questions are very important. So let's try and unpack some key concepts around how to read questions. What do some of the important words in a question mean? And then we'll look at how we access questions in section A. Guys, I often refer to the questions in section A as being your lower hanging fruit. So essentially, you know that if you were plucking fruit, guys, the easiest and the quickest fruit to get is to pluck the ones that are the lowest hanging. So section A is often, for me, I recognize it as a section where you can easily access some of these fruit that are hanging. So these are sections where you can quickly collect some marks in your basket. So remember that. That's a confidence booster, being able to access these. And then you go into section B, where you try and reach those questions that are the higher order challenging questions. So the examiner often sets these to get you excited about the exam paper, so that you now are into the paper having accessed some of these questions and scored some good marks before you move into section B. So remember that it's the lower hanging fruits in section A that you must answer. So there are different types of questions. There are questions that are short answer questions, such as multiple choice. You've got questions that require you to give some terms or describe some terms. We've got columns and statements that need to be matched. We've got matching terms and descriptions. We have true and false questions. We've got some diagrams where you need to label or interpret labels. We also have some short questions that require short answers, being able to label diagrams. So guys, these are often referred to as your lower hanging fruits. This is where we enjoy the paper. This is where we go in and we snap our fingers and we say, yes, we got it. And that's what you should be doing. So prepare well and use this to boost your confidence. And remember that a large percentage of the paper, 50 marks of the paper, come from this. So guys, make your best attempt at these questions. So question words help you answer a question. It's important that when you read a question, that you understand what these words mean. It is important to look for the question words. They tell you what you need to do, and to correctly understand what exactly the examiner is asking. Often the words describe, explain, list mean a lot. It's what the examiner wants you to respond to. So use these words in the next slide to be able to answer and guide you to answering a question. So analyze, calculate, classify, compare, define, describe. These are key words. And let's try and unpack these. And so the concept of compare would be where similarities are drawn or differences. For example, compare the difference between, or suggest the difference between DNA and RNA, or compare how two hormones function. And so those are questions that require you to draw comparison or similarities. The concept of determine. What does determine mean? Determine means to calculate something or to discover the answer by examining evidence, by determining, use the graph to determine what the temperature would be at a specific day. And that's using information and evaluating that. Differentiate. It's a word that means find the difference between. So use differences to qualify categories. We often find the word explain. What does explain mean? It means make it clear, interpret, or spell out exactly what is happening, or a concept. Identify means to name an essential characteristic, to be able to see what is happening, identify something, name a characteristic. Label is quite simple. We provide labels from a diagram or on a drawing. List is probably often confused with being able to explain things. So if it's a question that requires you to list a few factors or list the differences, it's purely a list of characteristics. It does not require an explain. The word mention. Mention again refers to relevant points. The word suggest means offer an explanation or a solution. And tabulate is again draw a table. Guys, we often see that the examiner uses a combination of these words. For example, discuss and explain the significance of a specific process, such as crossing over. So that requires you to discuss crossing over and to explain its significance. It's important that you are able to recognize these words and interpret them so that you can give the examiner a response that they need. So let's look at that. So here's an example of how to answer a question. The question reads, Figure 612 shows a longitudinal section through the human eye. Study the diagram and answer the questions that follow. Label parts 2 and 3 and 5 respectively. So that's a simple question that requires you to label the parts. The next question, name and describe the process that causes part 1 to dilate and become wider. So guys, that's a combination of two question words. It requires you to name as well as describe a process, and it's specific to a specific area. So notice that in this I was able to identify different components of the question and point that out. Further down, I'm going to read through this. Figure 6.13 is a longitudinal section to the human eye. The structures which enable the eye to focus on objects are missing in this diagram. Study the diagram and answer the questions that follow. Draw a longitudinal section through the missing part of the figure. It's clear, guys. It requires you to draw. Specifically, it points to this, the longitudinal section. Notice that as I read the question, I focused on the key aspects of the question. Let's go on. To indicate the appearance of these structures when you are reading a book. So it's context to reading a book. So what happens? You've got to describe the pupillary mechanism and the adjustment of the eye in the context of reading a book. Guys, it's important that you now have looked at how to answer questions in section A. When we get back after the break, we will look at attempting different types of questions and the rationale for answering these questions. Let's have a break, stretch, relax, drink some water, and I'll see you back in a bit. Well guys, welcome back. In our segment, now we're going to focus on attempting questions. We've looked at the different types of questions, we've looked at the structure of the exam paper. Now let's focus on how do we attempt questions in section A. It's important that we recognize that there are key words which we've looked at. It's important that there's a technique in answering each question. Let's unpack that technique and hope that you now can access those low-hanging fruits much more effectively. So guys, it's important that you understand that attempting a question is not simply reading the question. Reading the question is one part of it. Let's try and look at a system of thought processes that need to go through your head when you attempt a specific type of question. So the first type of question we're looking at are multiple choice questions. We often get learners finding this as being very easy. However, I must remind you that multiple choice questions are often confusing, and that's because you have 4 options to choose from. It's obvious when you know the answer, but when there is some confusion, that becomes a bit tricky. So what is the method that you use when answering a multiple choice question? Let's look at that. So first, we've got to read the question carefully. What does reading mean? Reading means you've got to be able to identify key components. Highlight or underline the key words such as discuss, describe, identify, give. Read all the possible options. So guys, we often get to a multiple choice question where we read the first answer and the first answer seems to be the most correct answer. And we very quickly say, well, I think it's A. I got that right. Be careful, because often in a multiple choice question, there are options that are much more closer or much more correct, that are more inclusive of a process. And I think it's important that you read all the options before you decide. It's important that you eliminate the odd or the incorrect options. Sometimes there are glaring options that are incorrect. It's good to eliminate those. And that just helps to narrow down and to shift your focus onto what is needed. Then decide on which is the most appropriate answer. Again, that allows you to be able to channel your energy and your thinking to a specific question. Write down the question number as per the question paper. It's often that we find that learners incorrectly label their questions. So 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, but learners go and change their numbering. And unfortunately, when it comes to a multiple choice question, if you've written down 1.1A, 1.2B, 1.4C, where was 1.3? And that can change your whole sequence of answers if that was an unintentional mistake. So it's important that you label your answers correctly and that you indicate the answers correctly as per the question number. Reread the questions and then pen your answers down. Do not leave any question unanswered. It's important that you give the examiner an opportunity to be able to assess you. I simply tell my learners, if there is no answer, all the marker does is put a cross across it. Mark it wrong. However, if there's an answer, you are forcing the reader to read your answer. It gives you the opportunity, even when you're not too sure, of being at least an opportunity to having your answer read. So never leave a question unanswered. Now let's try that in the next question. So guys, I've taken a snapshot of a question here, and I'm going to read that. And as you see on the right hand side, I've just got a checklist of what we need to do as we read through this question. So imagine that I'm sitting in an exam and I'm reading this question, and you with me, sitting on my shoulder, listening to me read this question. So let's go for it. Various options are provided as possible answers to the following questions. Choose the answer and write only the letter A to D next to the question numbers 1.1.1 to 1.1.9 in the answer booklet. Example 1.1.10, answer D. So guys, the examiner has given us a specific set of instructions as to how to present the answer. It's important that we do this. Remember that it's frustrating when you have an answer booklet and you don't know exactly the order in which these questions have been answered. It's easy at the end of the year when an examiner or the marker is in haste to mark through thousands of papers that they put a line across that. And I wouldn't want that for you to go through that experience. So let's label our answers correctly. Even at a test in school, it's important that you correctly label your answers. Let's move on. So the first thing is, remember, read the question carefully. So that's what I'm going to do. Which one of the following involves the development of the young inside the uterus of the mother, where it receives nutrients through the placenta? So we've got to identify which one. So I've highlighted, underlined the key concepts. I'm going to read through the possible options. So is it ovipary, vivipary, ovovivipary, or D, amniotic egg? Eliminate the odd or incorrect options. So again, I'd like to read the question again so that I'm not distracted. Which one of the following involves the development of the young inside the uterus of the mother, where it receives nutrients through the placenta? So guys, I know that I've got to eliminate. So inside the uterus of the mother means that it's not oviparous. It's definitely not the amniotic egg. Now we've got two options that we have that are clearly possibly correct. Then decide on which is the most appropriate answer. I know that my concepts, I've understood them well, and now I'm going to select the correct answer. And guys, we know that in vertebrate reproduction, it is the vivipary organisms or viviparous organisms that are developed in the uterus of the mother, where they receive nutrients through the umbilical cord attached to the placenta. I'm then going to write down question number 1.1.1 in my answer booklet, and I'm going to clearly indicate the letter B. Guys, sometimes we're in doubt, we then go back and we change our minds and we go letter C. Oh no. This becomes very confusing to the examiner. Avoid doing that, because this simply means that the examiner or the marker is going to put a line across, because this creates doubt as to what your answer is. So if that does happen, put a line across that and clearly indicate your answer so the examiner knows exactly what letter you've indicated. So that's a go at how to answer your multiple choice question. Now let's look at the next type of question, matching a statement to a description. Let's look at the concepts of how to unpack these questions. The first and fundamental thing is read the questions carefully. I cannot emphasize how important it is to read questions carefully. Highlight or underline the keywords fundamental to any question. Read the possible options of terms. Decide on which is the most appropriate term. Eliminate the odd or incorrect options if necessary, and then reread the questions and then pen your answer down. Guys, matching statements with descriptions can often be confusing because there are two options that are given, and those options are often close, similar, or not related, and hence it requires that you often reread those options with the question. Continue. Write down the question number as per the questions on the question paper. As I mentioned earlier on, you cannot do your own numbering system. State your answer clearly as either A only, B only, both A and B, or none. And guys, the questions often require to clearly state whether it is either one of these four. You simply cannot say A. It requires you to say A only, or both A and B. It does not cost you time for us to be able to write A only. It's important that you answer exactly the way the examiner wants you to. Do not leave any question out unanswered. As I said, when you leave a question out, you're not given the opportunity for that to be marked. So attempt to put an answer down. So let's attempt that by looking at this question. The question again, the first is read the question and get a description of the question clearly. So here, indicate whether each of the statements in column 1 applies to A only, B only, both A and B, or none. And the items in column 2 are given. Write only, A only, B only, both A and B, or none, next to the question number as provided. So guys, again, read the descriptions carefully. Here we've got a series of descriptions that are given. Let's attempt 1.3.1. Unfertilized eggs are released from the female's body. Okay, so that's the description. Highlight, underline the keywords which we've just done. Read the possible options of terms. So now we go on to the column 2, and there are two possible options that are given: asexual reproduction and external fertilization. Decide on which is the most appropriate term and go back to the question. Unfertilized eggs are released from the female's body. Reread the possible options. Is it asexual reproduction? No, because eggs are produced, guys. It cannot be asexual reproduction. They're released from the female's body, so it's possibly external fertilization. So I've eliminated the odd or incorrect option. I've put a line across that. I reread the question, which I had to go back and do, and then I've written down my answer as, in this case, the answer for 1.3.1 is B only. Have I followed instructions? Yes. Have I given the answer correctly in the format the examiner has wanted? Yes. And guys, that's essentially what you need to do, is have this mental checklist of running through the process of being able to answer the matching of columns type of questions. Now let's look at the next type of questions. Biological terms. Guys, as I always mention, as you're studying, it's important that you have a section of terminology, and that section of terminology helps you in these types of questions. So what is it that you do when you're answering questions on biological terms? Again, as I always say, read the descriptions carefully. Highlight or underline the key words. Look for keywords that link to a topic, and that's important. Often the descriptions are linked to a specific topic. That's fundamental to identifying the correct term. Pencil down options if there are a few terms that come to your mind. So sometimes these descriptions can be easily confused or can be mixed up. So the thoughts that come to your mind, pencil that down on the question paper. It's easier to pencil them down when you have it on pencil. You then start eliminating them. Write down the question number as per the questions provided. That's the golden rule. Do not leave the question unanswered. Check that all your answers are written in before moving on to the next question. I simply remind my learners to write an answer down. The worst is that you get it wrong. However, if there is no answer, you're guaranteed to get it wrong. So think about that. If there is no answer, you're guaranteed to get it wrong. If you're not too sure, and if you decide not to put an answer, it's a crime. You've got to put an answer down. At least that forces the examiner to read that answer. So let's attempt that. So give the correct biological term for each of the following descriptions. Write only the term next to the question numbers as indicated in the answer booklet. Now let's go through our checklist. Read the descriptions carefully. So the structures formed by centrioles during cell division. Highlight the underlined words which we've just done. Look for key words that link to the topic. Guys, key words are cell division. So we know that now we're thinking about meiosis, and that helps me to zero in on the topic. Pencil down a few options there. So structures that are formed by centrioles during cell division. Are these your centrioles? Could they be centromeres? If I'm confused, now I'm thinking. I was confused when I was studying this section. Let me look at this. No, guys, centromere is not correct. That's exactly what I've done. So I was confused. I penciled down my options. I've cleared my head. I've recollected the concept. It's centriole. Now I can write down my answer as per the question number. Notice that I've not left the answer out. I've attempted it to make sure that I have given the opportunity to be marked for this question. And that's how you should answer this. And guys, finally, we have got short questions. Again, these are questions that require you to read the heading and the description of the question. This gives you context to the content area. Look at the labels or the headings of the diagrams. Identify the parts that are familiar to you. Provide labels to parts that are marked with alphabets or numbers. And often, process like protein synthesis would be stage 1, stage 2. If you are able to list that down and just kind of scribble on that question paper, it gives you some context and zeroes in your focus to that specific topic. Then reread the question, look at the key words in the question. And guys, draw reference to the diagram with the context of the questions. Often these questions are linked to context, and draw reference to that from the question. Look at the mark allocation and remember that it's one concept, one mark. Write legibly throughout your paper. Space your answers out neatly. It is a good idea to leave a line between each answer. The golden rule is do not leave a question unanswered. Check that all your questions are answered before moving on to the next question. And note your time as you answer your questions. Guys, it's important that when you approach your exam, that you do it strategically. And you can take this and apply it to most of your subjects in terms of the way you answer a question paper. Remember that it's important that you attempt every question. I often encourage the learners to go for the lower hanging fruits, the question A type sections that are easier for you to answer. And that builds confidence. It gives you a sense of fulfillment so that when you get into those questions that are really challenging, that you know that you've accomplished at least some good responses in the sections that you've answered well. So guys, I trust that you've engaged with this topic. It's important that you understand that answering an exam is a very technical skill, that you take some of these and you apply that in your test and in your exams as you prepare for that final exam. So guys, from my side, all the best. See you soon. Have a baie lekker day.